we need a little vocabulary to make sure that we are using the precise language of experiments. When we talk about a response variable in an experiment, we're looking for the variable that measures an outcome or a result of the study. So we had response variables in observational studies as well. The only difference here is that we are trying to manipulate the response variable in an experiment. We have the explanatory variable, and that's going to be the variable that we think could be explaining or causing changes in the response variable. So in the observational study, the explanatory variable was not going to be able to cause a change. But in an experiment, because we can isolate everything else going on, we can actually show a causation relationship between the explanatory variable and a response variable. That's one of the most important things about experiments, is that you can actually produce this cause and effect kind of relationship. Any of the individuals studied in the experiment will often be called subjects. Instead of calling them individuals, you can also call them subjects. And then we'll have treatments, and that's going to be any specific experimental condition that's applied to these subjects. You can have several explanatory variables, and so the collection of all of those explanatory variables together would become a treatment. So I mentioned the differences between the observational studies and an experiment, so let's go ahead and write this down as well. In an observational study, you are passively collecting data. You're observing, recording, measures, but you're not imposing any treatment. So you're not randomly assigning individuals to different treatments. But in an experiment, you are intentionally intervening. You are intentionally imposing some treatment on the subjects in order to investigate the impact on the response variable. So one good question that you can ask yourself to determine if something was an experiment or an observational study is to ask, were particular treatments deliberately assigned to the subjects, or were the treatments more self-selected? So let's take a look at an example. It's been suggested that women and men differ in their political preferences. Women may be more likely than men to prefer Democratic candidates. So a political scientist selects a large sample of registered voters, both men and women, and asks them whether they voted for the Democratic or Republican candidate in the last congressional election. So would this be an observational study or an experiment? So let's ask the question, were the particular treatments, and in this case being male or female, deliberately assigned to the subjects, or were they self-selected? So in this case, a researcher cannot determine or cannot change your gender. So here, this would simply be an observational study because there were no particular treatments imposed by the researcher. Here, we're looking at these frozen muffins, and before they're put on the market, they're subjected to extensive taste testing. So people are asked to taste the new muffin and a competing brand and to say which they prefer. So here, we're actually imposing which muffin they're going to eat and which order they're going to eat them in. And so here, we're actually imposing a particular treatment, and that's going to make this an experiment. And then a study in the Annals of Internal Medicine, they followed 10,892 middle-aged adults over a 9-year period. At the start of the study, none of the subjects had diabetes. Roughly 45% of the subjects were smokers. The study found that compared to those who never smoked, subjects who quit smoking had an increased risk of diabetes. So here, this one's going to be an observational study, because never did the researcher tell the participants what to do. So they did not have them start smoking or stop smoking or anything specific there. They simply observed what was happening with the individuals to see what kind of outcomes were happening, but they were not imposing a particular treatment to see the effect of that treatment.